Welcome to On the Level, broadcasting from the Blue Ocean Network studios here in Beijing. My name is Fergus Thompson. Now, as China's political season draws to a close and delegates to what are called the two sessions, these are the general full meetings, annual meetings of the country's top political advisory body and its parliament, the National People's Congress. All these delegates start to head home to their towns across the country. The journalists in the two sessions will be wrapping up their stories. But the two sessions themselves don't tend to yield a lot of what would be considered in Western tradition sexy news, headline-grabbing news. So the two press conferences, or the press conferences held at the beginning and at the end of the conference, tend to be the highlight for domestic and foreign media, and indeed also for the public here. And it's these press conferences, and in particular the spokespeople who run them, who demonstrate how much public communications have evolved here in China. Indeed, there's been a revolution in how the government and corporations communicate with the public, with the media here in China, and also in countries abroad, a sea change in the perception of public relations. So to discuss those changes and the situation of PR in China, I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Stephen Dong. Professor Dong is Vice President of the China Public Relations Association. He also has a number of titles related to media and public relations, including Dean of the Public Affairs and Media Department in the China University of Communications. And he also, on top of that, trains and advises Chinese government officials at various levels. Stephen Dong, welcome to On the Level.
It's my pleasure.
Now, I've seen your name mentioned in the media several occasions, linked to the words PR guru. You are in the public relations field, and you're seen very much as somebody who has brought the development and explosion of interest in public relations to China. But originally, like many people in PR, you come from the other side, from the journalism side. You were an anchor on state television here. How did that change come about? How did you get into PR?
So really, I have to say, I'm just witnessing the entire process, because I'm only one of the former Chinese journalists who later on had a very big transition to change from one side of the story to the other side. When I was presenting on CCTV, presenting the Chinese language major time news, I did have the concern, because there were so many officials in China. They were good in action, doing good things for the people. Mm-hmm. But once they were in the studio, they were not themselves anymore. They make horrible, stupid mistakes.
So you saw a need for this sort of training definitely existed?
I did have the feeling, but mm-hmm. until I start to teach at the Tsinghua University, because it was 13 years ago. Mm-hmm. We got a call from a very senior official in China, and actually his boss is even the highest boss. He said, something happened overseas. It's a big national disaster. A serious terrorism attack happened. But why now?
These were the 9/11 attacks?
Yes, mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. But from the outside view, we feel everything in communication is in the perfect order. So our state leader was so curious to know how Chinese people can, well in the disaster, national disaster, can we convey the information in an efficient way? Mm-hmm. So that's the time I started to train Chinese spokespersons.
Right. Well, you and your colleagues have certainly had some effect in China, and I think I linked it to those two sessions, those political meetings were taking place, and the spokespeople there. These are, in fact, the modern face of public communications in China. Give us an idea of how much things have changed. How different is their performance as we've seen over the past few days compared to what we might have seen several years ago?
Oh, definitely. For the National People's Congress and the CPPCC's annual gathering in March, to have press conferences has been a tradition for nearly 20 years. But if we play back some of the old tapes, we will feel there is a revolutionary change, really, because at the very beginning you can see every single press conference is always serious. Mm-hmm. We say it's a press conference, but many of the questions were prepared in advance. It was in the harmony between some of the designed journalists.
It was theatrical. To a certain extent.
So it's not really journalism. Mm-hmm. But I have to tell that nowadays, especially the first press conference in this season by Minister Liu, and he was talking in a very relaxed way. And even for controversial question.
We should just explain, this is a Hong Kong-based newspaper, so it operates in a very different media environment.
Sure.
And they asked about a senior politician here, whether he was going to be investigated, Zhou Yongkang, and the spokesman answered very much like an American spokesperson.
Sure.
You know what I mean. I'm not telling you anymore. Yeah. It hasn't always been like this. This is, as you say, improvements. In the past, as you have already pointed out, the form of communication from the government, particularly, but also maybe the big corporations to the public, tended to be very one way. For want of a better word, you could almost say arrogant. We are giving you this information, you will listen to it, and you will not ask questions, and you will shut up if you know what's best for you. Now, how did this change come about? When did you see this change, when propaganda became information, and why?
I would have to say, during the first 2 years, we trained government officials. It was not an enjoyable experience at all. Why they were not so interested? Because they thought they will only be judged, be promoted, or be punished by their upper level boss, not by the people directly. So they don't care about the media at all. Until 2 years later, SARS attacked China.
Right. So this was a key point.
Yes, that's the milestone, because everything seemed on a very fast track to develop so rapidly, immediately. There was a midnight, I got a call, very mysterious. I said, who is calling at 3 o'clock in the morning? But this was a spokesperson. He said, Professor Dong, I attended your lecture a year ago in the spokesperson training seminar. Can you send me the PowerPoint again? I said, no, this is 3 o'clock. Can you do that tomorrow? Right. And he said, no, I want to do it now.
So there was a realization that they needed these skills that you had taught, but they hadn't paid attention to earlier. They needed them now. We should just explain that SARS, at first the reaction was to cover it up, but this very soon changed, and once the information started going out, there was a much better public response. That was in 2003, but it seems that some of these lessons didn't sink in. 2011, we had the Wenzhou train disaster. This was a high-speed train which crashed, 40 people killed, totally unexpected, of course. There were PR problems there. Tell us a little bit about what happened there, because I believe you were involved, or you were around the scene at the time.
I was a member of the advisory committee for crisis communication of the State Council. So it means after the SARS, I was kind of involved in many on the theme crisis communication advisory opportunities. For the Wenzhou disaster, I have to say, I'm going to provide a different version comparing with many of the media reports during that time.
Which circulated.
Everybody was criticizing the Minister of Railway, but actually he just came into the office 3 months ago after the former minister were kind of corrupted.
Had been fired, essentially.
Yes, absolutely. So he was a very hardworking man.
But new to the job.
On the night, something happened at 8:34 in the evening. He called on an emergent meeting. I would remember 5 minutes after 9 o'clock. So it is like half an hour later. So he called on a very senior level national emergency committee within the railway ministry. So this is a very efficient
efficient and quick reaction.
And 5 minutes later, there was an airplane prepared for them at the Beijing International Airport. So they flew to Wenzhou without hesitation. So I had a very good comparison, because they arrived in Wenzhou even half an hour earlier than the provincial local officials. So it means they were hardworking, they were efficient, they were doing the right job. But the only one thing missed is communication.
Right. Now, that spokesperson for the railways, at one particular conference, Wang Yongping was his name. It was a tough conference, and the Chinese press were being extremely aggressive in this. They wanted to know it. It was a huge story. Now, he seemed ill-prepared. He came across a couple of statements which seemed a little incredible to the journalist, and he did at one stage say this famous phrase, "Whether you believe it or not, I believe it." What happened after that?
I mean, this is a very, very typical phenomenon in Chinese political organizations' reaction after a crisis during that time. So I have to say, after 8 years of very fast development, some of the organizations become lazy because they believe PR is a spokesperson. PR is press conference. So PR is only the spokesperson's job.
Now, there are levels. The case of Wang, unfortunately, Mr. Wang Guanpeng there was one where saying too much got him into trouble. But another problem that you do see in China is an innate, sort of an inside reaction amongst many officials to immediately stonewall, to shut up, to try to ignore it, to say nothing, or to actually to silence the press. How do you deal with this sort of reaction? Because it is very deeply ingrained.
In classroom, in advisories, they agree with me. Tell the truth fast, in an efficient way. But in practice, they like to go back to their childhood. They like to remember what they have been doing before. Wang Yongping's case is a very prominent case that during the first maybe 24 hours, they thought rescue the people, saving the people's life is number one. They were thinking every media communication is controllable, at least by the central government. But the problem was, in that year, Weibo was kind of booming.
This is a sort of a Twitter-like service, which is very popular in China.
So managing the opinion on Weibo is entirely different to compare with managing opinion on CCTV or Xinhua News Agency. So
this is something that couldn't be controlled, certainly not so easily.
They only realized on the morning of the second day. So they called Wang Yongping, "Where are you?" And he said, "I'm in Beijing." And then the minister said, "Why you are not here?" And he said, "I was not in the list of 150 people yesterday night flying to Wenzhou." And then he said, "You must come. Even next time you are not in the name list, you must come immediately." But this is not going to be worked out because Wang Yongping arrived later in the evening. He had a very horrible weather. The flight cannot really take off in time. After he arrived, something even happened so tragedy for him because suddenly he realized he was knowing nothing about the crisis at all. 3 recommended Director General officials were recommended to work with him. But those 3 people never ever be interviewed by the media at all. So they were so afraid of talking to the people. And eventually, they canceled the press conference at 8:30. And 9:30, the vice premier came here to say, "You cannot do this. You must tell people something." So 10:30, they had the press conference. Wang Yongping was the lonely guy to talk to the media. He had 8 years of perfect, excellent record of being a spokesperson. Loved, welcomed by the press. But only that night, that moment, it changed because he talked for half an hour, nearly okay. But someone, I wouldn't say who is it, but definitely one of the decision-making body from the ministry saying, "Oh, it looked really good because after you talk to the press, the media is so calm. They like to communicate with us. So you must have a longer press conference." But what he prepared, the sources, the evidence he got is only good for half an hour.
Right.
So when he keeps saying, then definitely it's much more than he knows.
These are examples of where things have gone wrong, but you must also have come across examples on the positive side of where things have gone right. I'm thinking there was good reception to how the bird flu cases, many of the bird flu cases were handled here. What sort of difference did you see there?
Because immediately after the SARS, I have to say Ministry of Health is the pioneer to do better communication solutions. As a scholar, I said there was 3 stages of the health communications revolution in China conducted by the Ministry of Health. Stage number 1, that's from 2003 to 2006, is very much I call the information communication. So they established a spokesperson not as during the SARS, because during the SARS, they don't want to tell people anything. But immediately after the SARS, every week or every month at least, their spokesperson, Mr. Mao Chuan, will meet with the press. And from 2006 to 2009, stage number 2 is they started to become a model of crisis communication. That's especially during the H1N1, H7N9.
These are these bird flu epidemics. Yeah.
They very much say 早发现,早隔离,早治疗. So basically, the key word is early. They believe that the early, the less loss. Stage 3 is multimedia. So from 2009, they even started to make TV dramas, documentaries, and new media. It means some really just amateur-made documentary on the internet. So now Ministry of Health, I would say this is the pioneer.
This is the model to follow for other departments of the government. Coming away from these these particular situations, in terms of teaching, as you do here, you train government officials here, do you find that, particularly dealing with the foreign media, and I'm thinking of maybe the foreign ministry here, which is always dealing with foreign journalists, do cultural differences or translational differences come into play? The reason I mention this is that very often the foreign ministry will use phrases in English which sound rather strange to Western or foreign media. One particularly that everybody's used to hearing is when a government organisation or indeed a media organisation says something that the government doesn't like here or feels is not fair, you'll get this phrase, "You have hurt the feelings of the Chinese people." Now, this may sound great in Chinese, but it fails on two fronts. It doesn't communicate what they actually mean, and it diverts attention because it makes them sound like a child complaining in the schoolyard. Now, these are not stupid people in the foreign ministry. They must know at this stage. Why do they continue to do these, to use these phrases when they know perhaps the translation is wrong? Is there a problem with that?
Yeah, this has been a problem for a long time. I definitely say they are trying to do less and less, but still the politician in the central headquarters, they are inventing new terms every day, and proposing new policies every day. So it's not really possible to make everything correct.
Change. A link to this, perhaps, cultural differences. Again, dealing with the foreign media, there's this is not just China, Japan and South Korea. There's this cultural phenomenon here in Asia of loss of face. Now, this is something which can make it difficult in certain circumstances for somebody who feels they're in a senior position to apologise or to say we did something wrong. Do you manage to, is this something you address in your training?
Absolutely. This is definitely a compulsory part of my training.
But difficult to change, I would say, because it's part of the culture. That's what you grow up with.
But something is helping me, even outside the training session, because for example, number one, most of the spokesperson now, they at least have studied overseas. So they witness what the cultural difference can make them so awkward in some situation.
They've gone through that experience.
Yes.
So this is why this newer generation who have had these advantages will presumably not find this so difficult.
We do not only train them in China. For example, for the State Council Information Office, for the cabinet spokespersons, we during the last 12 years, we had. Every year we have the classes in George Washington University in DC. We also have a class in the UK in Westminster University. So when they come back, not only me persuading them, they already been seeing something good advice as well.
Right.
At the same time, even the training seminar is in China. We also invite international communication advisor to train them.
Right. Now, talking verbal PR is very important. What's written and what's said by spokespeople, but there's also the area of image in PR and the image that is given out by very often by a person. Now. We have President Xi Jinping at the moment, a very different, a very strong contrast in his media presence in comparison to previous heads of state here. As we can see in the picture here, he's very, very relaxed. This is not what the public, the people outside are used to seeing from a Chinese leader. Is this something that has been taught to him, or is he natural in this particular situation? He seems to be very comfortable with the press and know how to deal with it and how far to go and when not to say things.
I would say both, because number one, when he was party secretary of Zhejiang, Shanghai, and Fujian, they were quite welcomed by the local media. And most recently, the local media were even publishing memoir of what they had experiences with the former party secretary in the provinces. And number two, I would say he is very willing to listen to advices from the professional people.
Right, so there's a mixture of natural talent and willingness to take on board the sort of advice that
something
people like you
even couldn't imagine early on, because for the time he visited a Chinese dumpling restaurant, the first news about this was released on Weibo rather than Xinhua News Agency. This is the first time ever in Chinese history for more than half century in
and
the Communist Party.
This was a visit to a very local area in Beijing and seen
Yes.
not in a normal, very normal restaurant. The sort of thing that we see American and European politicians doing regularly, but not so often here. Now, you mentioned Weibo there. This is essentially a social media like Twitter, and there's also Weixin, which is a message service here. How are these affecting your job and the job of people who are dealing with the public? Because, as you mentioned, these are not so easily controllable as state media. They are controllable to an extent, and there's certainly a lot of self-censorship on them. Are the governments here using these as tools to project their message?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I revise my teaching material nearly every day. Because the problem is, comparing with the first lecture I give in the year 2001 to the officials, that's terrible. If I use that PowerPoint to teach today's politician, even everybody in the audiences, they will be laughing at me. So why it happened? Because of Weibo. So Weibo is something in China so deeply pushing the democratic process, the transparency. Talking about transparency is because during the last 3 years, I was more often involved in crisis scenes. So the first 5 minutes is always the crucial point, because only 5 minutes later, the first information will come out by Weibo, by people, not by journalists.
That could have taken days before, and then hours when it was television and cable network, now becomes minutes as the information is disseminated without control.
So government people are forced to give a feedback immediately after people have seen something 5 minutes after the crisis.
Now, we've heard of anti-rumor campaigns, which have been legislation, and people who have been writing on this Twitter-like platform have been warned about rumors. They certainly exist, these rumors, but is this just a way of simply shutting people up and saying that there are too many rumors on this, and therefore we are going to cut them off?
My argument is, if we really want to have Weibo to become a good platform for democracy and transparency, we have to protect Weibo far away from the most important platform for rumors, because rumors will eventually damage the reputation of Weibo. So from last year, I would welcome the government already introduced some new regulations, and even the Supreme Court they had a temporary explanation of Weibo's rumor.
What was considered a rumor, yes. Very subjective, though, what is considered a rumor. And rumors fly in China as they do everywhere else. This is a country where people used to say, they used to listen to rumors and say, a rumor can't be proven true until the government denies it. There's no doubt that these rumors do exist. They're not an invention of the government to control Weibo. That's moving on to the area of black PR and what is called in China the Internet Navy, where people will actually use these systems to force public opinion in the way they want to. Not from the government side, but perhaps from corporations. Or how do these companies work and operate, the black PR companies? As
a professional body, the China Public Relations Association, representing the standard practice of PR in China. So actually, for a year-long time last year, we were campaigning to say black PR is not PR. But people like to use the name black PR.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. We even need to do PR for our PR people.
But it has affected your profession.
Definitely.
You feel perhaps you have to justify yourself.
Definitely. When we say internet PR, and people automatically think, oh, this is something like bullying the enemies on the internet, hiring those internet navy to attack.
Just to explain, these are vast numbers of people who will push comments and in some cases erase comments to form a particular picture, a perception of an event or a company or a person.
Sure. This is something not only new for the people, but also for PR professionals. I have to say the first one started from 6 years ago, widely reported by the police as well. But soon after that, especially after Weibo was kind of controlling the opening field like 2 years ago. So black PR becomes so prominent, profitable, and also powerful. Many people were looking at this phenomenon for a certain period, even including the police, even including academicians and also PR professionals. After a very steady observation, we realized that this is an evil. to PR and also to the democracy process, to the transparent efforts. So eventually, everybody agreed to stop this, written in law, and punish those people who make money of doing black PR, and this is not PR.
Again, your profession, the PR profession, works very much in tandem, in cooperation, we could say, with journalism. You have come from that field yourself. Now, in dealing with journalists here, and again I'm turning to the foreign ministry because they tend to be the ones that deal with the outside world on behalf of the government, there has been a tradition, there has been a sort of a phenomenon recently where journalists from outside China who are seen as not towing the line are threatened with their visas not being renewed later on. Now, surely this is rather a clumsy way of dealing with these media professionals, because they're not going to react the way you want to. They rather than trying to cooperate with the journalists, they're setting up confrontation.
I mean, generally, people like to work with the journalists in a good way, talking about any Chinese government officials. But the problem is, for a long time, China has a very different media and even political system comparing with United States or the UK. I have to say, people shouldn't deny some of the efforts the government has done. For example, before the Olympics. That's why New York Times people, AP people, they informally saying, oh, we love Olympics.
Certainly, a fantastic job before the Olympics, but now, 4 or 5 years later, a lot of that work being undone by these tactics, which can only cause problems.
That's because everything we enjoyed during the Olympics was not written in regulation or written in law.
For example, journalists could go anywhere in the country and interview
experiment.
Anybody.
Right. It was a lovely experiment. But after the lovely experiment, we need to write it in law, write it in regulation, and even we need to reform some of some of the control agencies within Foreign Ministry, within ICIO, even in the Public Security Bureau. But it didn't happen. Or at least it didn't happen that much, because they may have other, even more important agenda.
Yeah,
they thought
you can see, though, from the outside how it might look to journalists who are affected in this way, that it was said for the Olympics, and then once the Olympics had taken place successfully, it was withdrawn.
I'm not really that negative talking about the future, because, I mean, after 2 years, nearly 2 years, the new administration installed, we have seen they are doing everything they promised. Everything is fine. So something changing in journalism or media and communication in China is carefully categorized as a political revolution. So political revolution has not yet happened. So we are still changing the economic side or some anti-corruption. But even anti-corruption campaign is not really a Western style. It's quite Chinese style.
It is.
Party will investigate.
It's internal, and rather than having an outside supervision.
Yes.
So you're saying basically that these changes will happen, but perhaps not as quickly as some people might like.
I'm very sure it will happen, but it will not happen because people keep complaining this. They keep complaining about this may, in the short term, to bring lots of damage to the existing friendship we already had.
Right. And there might be some on the other side saying that those sort of tactics would also cause problems with the journalists here. I want to look, as you mentioned, we're looking towards the future. Do you feel that the government has a long-term strategy for the improvement of its public relations and communications?
Oh, absolutely. For example, 10 years ago, CPRA, China Public Relations Association, we were a very weak organization. So members who are running Chinese PR agencies, they were also weak. But after Olympic Games, the forums in Boao, and also some others in Beijing, in Dalian, also Shanghai Expo. We have seen
where Chinese officials were dealing with the outside world.
So we have seen a very different picture now.
Well, as you describe it, it certainly sounds like a very interesting field to be involved here in China, a field that is, as you said, has exploded very suddenly and seems to have a very bright future, both on the government side and with the corporations.
Media on the move, PR, welcome a new spring.
And I'm sure you will be involved in it, Professor Dong. Professor Dong, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Left.
Thank you.